Well, good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled COVID-19 Product Development and Clinical Trials, Considerations from European Regulatory Perspectives. My name is Sumaya, and I'll be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, with time for a question and answer session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the webinar by clicking the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. I'd also like to tell audience members we have 2 attachments for this webinar as well. You can download that in the attachments module in your control panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please also note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Medpace, who developed the content for this presentation. Medpace is a scientifically driven, global, full-service clinical contract research organization providing phase 1 to 4 clinical development services to the biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and medical device industries. Medpace's mission is to accelerate the global development of safe and effective medical therapeutics through its high science and disciplined operating approach that leverages local regulatory and deep therapeutic expertise across all major therapeutic areas. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. And our first speaker is Andrew Massey. So Andrew Massey is a vice president at Medpace and has been with the company since 2007. Based in London, Andrew has over 17 years of experience in clinical research and has worked across all major therapy lines, including infectious disease. His experience includes supporting many clients to bring new therapies to market, including NDA, BLA, and marketing authorizations. Andrew supports global operations at Medpace and is a key leader for Europe and has supported clients to ensure successful delivery of their programs. Our second speaker is Tanya Konovalenko. Tanya Konovalenko has over 25 years of international experience in drug development of small molecules and biologics to all phases of clinical research, authorization, and post-approval. She has worked in Canada and Switzerland and has served as a principal interface for interactions with major regulatory agencies, including EMA, FDA, Health Canada, and various national competent authorities in Europe. Tanya has extensive experience with pre-submission meetings, interactions, and negotiations with the agencies, and has designed and executed effective global regulatory strategies, submission review, and post-approvals. And our final speaker for today's webinar is James Thomas. James Thomas has a combined scientific, that's microbiology and infection, with focus upon emerging infections, legal, so that's master's in biotechnology, law, and ethics, and ethical background to conduct and oversee submissions and approvals in more than 50 countries from phase 1 to 4 over the last 15 years. His additional interactions are with regulatory authorities, government policy stakeholders across the spectrum of therapeutic indications and trial types. So that's medicines, radiopharmaceuticals, biosimilars, medical devices, combination products, and advanced therapies. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the presentation to our speakers. So you may begin when ready.
Okay, thank you very much everyone for joining. I hope that you can hear me well, and I hope that you're doing well and keeping safe and managing as best as you can in these difficult times. It is Medpace's pleasure to present to you today, so thank you for joining. We have built this presentation based on recent interactions that we've had with our sponsors, highlighting some of the typical questions that we have received and the advice that they have been seeking with regards to deploying COVID-19 research in Europe. So we thought it would be a very valuable exercise to present to a wider audience some of the advice and tips to help navigate this extremely dynamic environment. With our aim to support our sponsors to be part of the solution for the current pandemic. If you look at this first slide, you can see the big blue arrow, and then within that 4 arrows, we have split this presentation into 4 main areas based on a typical regulatory chronological flow. Obviously, with the ultimate goal of bringing new therapies to patients as soon as possible. So first, if you look at the lighter blue box, the concept idea, we'll look at how to develop a regulatory pathway for a new concept idea where perhaps current data is limited. And then we'll go on to look at repurposing, a very hot topic right now in the industry and in the media. Looking into approaches, I mean, there's a lot of scientific groups looking into approaches to identify possible target products, irrespective of the current indication or use, to repurpose specifically for COVID-19. And then if you look at the lighter gray box, we'll look at smaller niche trials and how we can utilize those using different country submission approaches aligned to the varying levels of research acceptance we are seeing within those countries. And this section is more suited to the earlier phases of any potential clinical program. And then finally, we look at the big expanded trials applicable for later phases of a program, looking at strategies to accelerate the program whilst maintaining optimal flexibility in this changing environment. We go to the next slide, please. So I want to begin with an interesting quote from one of our physicians. And we thought it was interesting as it helps show that the disease is not simply a viral pneumonia affecting the respiratory system. And as data is rapidly accumulated in the industry, we can learn more and more every day. We see that COVID-19 or severe COVID-19 infection is often multi-systemic, affecting multiple body systems, which in turn shows that there are many opportunities for us to develop new or repurposed treatments to help patients in immediate need. So there's a nice little quote there that we thought was interesting. We go to the next slide. I think one thing that we've all seen, all of us involved in this industry, which is a great positive, is the coming together of all different key players, from regulatory authorities, sponsors, CROs and sites, to a clear common goal, the goal of bringing treatments as quickly as possible to patients. We are seeing regulators, sponsors, CROs and sites working in a disruptive way to be as efficient as possible, be it protocol development in a matter of days or regulatory review and approval in record-breaking time. We have seen a lot of records broken at the moment with the deployment of clinical studies, so that's very, very engaging. As we all unite to collect data and develop diagnostics, vaccines and therapy agents, one thing to note of great importance is, and I'm sure you are all aware as it's in the media everywhere, is that vaccine success is not a given, and actually a successful vaccine to achieve is very difficult to achieve. Even though we can see some very positive developments. Therefore, the development of additional therapeutic agents is crucial for COVID-19 treatment, and indeed perhaps learning from new approaches for the treatment of current infections and future novel infectious disease. We see that flexibility and planning and real-time adaptation as key to face the challenges of conducting rapid investigation in a changing regulatory environment. And the challenge of the indication itself poses many complexities, with one of the greatest being the competition for patients, the shift in geographical spread, as we've all seen across the globe, and possibilities of new waves and sporadic isolated outbreaks. So hopefully in these presentations, you'll see us touch on all of those and give you some good, interesting things to think about and some tips and advice. And with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Tanya, who will start us off looking at the concept and the idea. So Tanya, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start with the statement that COVID-19 affects us all. It doesn't care who we are or where we are, everyone is at risk. fast spread of coronavirus disease to over 200 countries pose substantial challenges to the government, health systems, medical and scientific communities, and pharma industry. This pandemic caused the unique and unprecedented level of global and European collaboration related to research for COVID-19 vaccine and treatment. Some of the global initiatives to fast-track development, production, and access to new COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines are led by the World Health Organization. This includes the COVID-19 Tools Accelerator Solidarity Trial, Target Product Profile for Vaccines Development, and Research and Development Blueprint Strategy. More than 100 countries agreed to join a Solidarity clinical trial for COVID-19 treatments. The Solidarity trial has been initiated to compare 4 treatment options against standard of care to assess their relative effectiveness against the virus by enrolling patients in multiple countries in order to rapidly discover whether any of the drugs slow disease progression or improve survival. The individual or combined drugs being studied in the Solidarity trials are repurposed drugs that are already approved for other diseases and recognized as safe. Due to safety concerns and evidence of heart arrhythmias leading to higher death rates, the World Health Organization suspended one of the arms, the hydroxychloroquine arm of the Solidarity trial, a few weeks ago, and only 3 treatment arms are currently remaining in the study. Another important initiative is the COVID-19 Therapeutics Accelerator, which will play a catalytic role by accelerating and evaluating new and repurposed drugs and biologics to treat patients with COVID-19. The accelerator will test approved drugs for activity against COVID-19, screen libraries of thousands of compounds with confirmed safety data, and consider new investigational compounds and monoclonal antibodies. The biotech and pharmaceutical industry will be critical partners, bringing their compounds library and clinical data to the collaboration and commercialization. Next, please. At the same time, European Medicines Agency has been contributing to global efforts to combat COVID-19 and has been working closely with the other European bodies such as the European Commission, the Health Security Committee, and the European Center for the Disease Prevention and Control, national competent authorities and health technology assessment bodies, and with international partners such as World Health Organization and the International Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Authorities. The European Medicines Agency has established a dedicated task force to deal with the scientific, regulatory, and operational challenges created by the COVID-19 pandemic. The role of the COVID-19 EMA task force is to help European member states and the European Commission to take quick and coordinated regulatory action on the development, authorization, and safety monitoring of medicinal products intended for the treatment and prevention of COVID-19. The activities of the task force include reviewing available scientific data and identifying promising candidates, requesting data from developers and engaging with them in preliminary discussions, offering scientific support to enable clinical trials for the most promising medicines for COVID-19, providing feedback on development plans of COVID-19 medicines, advising the Scientific Advice Working Party or the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use on formal scientific advice and product-related assessments. The task force is accountable to EMA's CHMP for all its activities. Biopharma and biotech companies are approaching the fight for COVID-19 pandemic with different weapons: vaccines, repurposed drugs, antivirals, clinical antibodies. One of the quickest options for tackling COVID-19 is to try to repurpose existing treatments, for example, medicines that are already approved for treating other viral infections, such as HIV, or possessing immunomodulatory activity. There is safety evidence of this medicine so that clinical trials can be initiated quickly. In addition, the manufacturing process and quality parameters are established so that investigational products can be easily available to patients. For example, scientists from UK headquartered AI Precision Medicine Group have identified 59 repurposing drug candidates that could be used to develop new therapeutic strategies to boost survival rates for patients who develop sepsis while suffering from severe COVID-19. The company analyzed patients' data sets compiled by UK Biobank to identify genes associated with sepsis, which are also found in severe COVID-19 patients. In terms of new compounds, including vaccines that have limited or no existing clinical data and are further upstream in the pipeline, although the development process for these agents may take longer, they could be most promising candidates to fight the coronavirus. It's improbable that a single drug will be enough to control and improve the most severe forms of COVID-19, given its systemic pathophysiology. Successful treatment regimens will likely need to address several aspects. Treatment of the viral infection itself to reduce and eliminate the viral load, prevention and treatment of the development of the severe acute respiratory distress syndrome, hyperinflammation, and cytokine storm, and additional pathophysiological components of the severe disease such as blood coagulation activation, thrombosis, sepsis, renal and cardiac failure, Kawasaki disease-like symptoms in children, and potential long-term outcomes such as deterioration of lung function. If we go to the next slide, we can see that there are currently over 1,700 clinical trials that have been registered worldwide. Over 600 interventional trials being planned or running in the European Union alone, mostly rapid hypothesis generating small studies. Several concerns have been raised about multiple small studies. Do we need 600 trials? Is that a good use of resources? Can these trials possibly deliver, or they leave us as much in the dark as we were before the trial was conducted? The European agency stated that multiple underpowered studies that compete for essential resources should be discouraged. To this effect, it has been recognized that large randomized control, adequately powered studies investigating multiple treatment options and approaches within a cross trial are the best way to collect robust evidence to determine which investigational agents or repurposed medicines are safe and effective for the treatment of COVID-19. These studies have the potential to deliver results as rapidly as possible across a range of therapeutic options. Unfortunately, very large platform trials come with their own weaknesses, and they will not be able to test every plausible permutation, for example, mixed antiviral and anti-inflammatory agents. Ideally, platform trials must be preceded by well-designed, controlled phase 2 trials that would enable to define the next intervention. However, this requires proper coordination between phase 2 and phase 3 type trials. If we go to the next slide, that you can see that there are other obstacles. Please, next slide. For every week that trials do not deliver, more and more patients are exposed to the wrong treatments. Therefore, the development of priority criteria for planned trials and coordinated clinical research are required. For example, World Health Organization has now taken steps to provide greater coordination through its Solidarity Trial. The ERA versus Corona Action Plan, launched by the European Commission, aims to extend and support large European-wide clinical trials for clinical management of coronavirus patients by providing rapid, dedicated funding and infrastructure. Unfortunately, in European Union, there is limited culture of large networks that go beyond national borders. And as a result, there are substantial organizational and bureaucratic obstacles to rapid research coordination. An additional complexity is the inclusion of vulnerable or neglected populations such as pregnant women, children, elderly, and patients with renal and hepatic impairments in COVID-19 studies. While studies may be initiated and performed more rapidly when focused on well-defined homogeneous population, the overall development strategy must aim for representativeness and include these patients in clinical development. Lastly, there is an urgent need for alignment with regulatory expectations on study protocols and general recommendations on early drug development in COVID-19 to ensure that results meet regulatory requirements and allow the evidence to be used to support the approval of medicines or vaccines. As you know, on average, it takes over 12 years to do all the research and development necessary before a new medicine is available on the market for use in patients. In regards to COVID-19 pandemic, there is an urgent need to accelerate development process. To this effect, EMA has published Emerging Health Threats Plan outlining how the agency will accelerate every step of medicine's regulatory pathway so that marketing authorizations of safe, effective, and high-quality COVID-19 related medicines can be granted as soon as possible. EMA is now encouraging developers to make contact with the agency to discuss the available data, regulatory strategy, and clinical plan for evidence generation in support of regulatory approval. There are a number of accelerated mechanisms in place now that support research and development, as well as accelerated evaluation in authorization and post-authorization procedures, which we discuss in more details now. Let's look at the, can we display the next slide, please? No, previous slide, please. Yeah, let us look at the available accelerated mechanism in place that support research and development. For products in development, EMA now offers rapid scientific advice through which developers can receive guidance and direction on the best methods and study designs to generate robust data on how well a medicine or vaccine works. Also how safe it is, as well as on the manufacturing and control process to establish its quality. In the context of COVID-19, fees for scientific advice are waived and the procedure is reduced to a maximum of 20 days compared to normal of 40 to 70 days. Second, rapid agreement of pediatric investigational plan and rapid compliance check. In principles, children should not be categorically excluded from clinical trials of investigational COVID-19 products in which there is a prospect for drug benefit. Therefore, sponsors are encouraged to submit a pediatric plan as soon as practicable. As you know, the current European regulatory framework requires a pediatric plan or pediatric waiver for all new medicine or new indications prior to submission of marketing authorization application. The total review time for pediatric plan for COVID-19 products is reduced to approximately 20 days now, compared to normally up to 120 days active review time. EMA also carries out a check to ensure companies comply with the agreed measures listed in each pediatric plan before marketing authorization can be submitted and accepted for review. A compliance check is also reduced to 4 days now. Third, EMA can provide support in the context of compassion use programs. Such programs are set up at the level of individual European member states in order to give patient access to treatments that are still under development and that have not yet received a marketing authorization. EMA can provide scientific recommendation as to how these medicines should be used in this context. in order to support harmonized European-wide approach. If we go to the next slide, then we can see that there are other mechanisms related to marketing authorization and post-authorization procedures. Applications for marketing authorization for COVID-19 products are now treated in expedited manner. One of the mechanisms is rolling review. Rolling review is the procedure used in public health emergency that allows EMA to assess data for a promising medicine as they become available on a rolling basis. Under normal circumstances, all data supporting marketing authorization application must be submitted at the start of the evaluation procedure. In the case of rolling review, CHMP rapporteurs are appointed while development is still ongoing, and the agency reviews data as they become available. Several rolling review cycles can be carried out during the evaluation of one product as data continue to emerge. Once the data package is considered complete, a developer submits a formal marketing authorization application to EMA, which is then processed under the shortened timetable. In regards to accelerated assessment, under normal circumstances, this regulatory mechanism can reduce the review time of products of major interest for public health from 210 days to less than 150 days. In the current situation, when there is an urgent public health need, assessment timelines will be reduced to the absolute minimum. And this mechanism can be considered for medicinal products and vaccines that are not undergoing a rolling review. Now let's look at the real case example. If we go to next slide, then Gilead is the first company completed the phase 3 study for COVID-19 and submitted regulatory applications for remdesivir to EMA and FDA based on preliminary results from the ACTT study, which suggest a beneficial effect of remdesivir in the treatment of hospitalized patients with mild to moderate or severe COVID-19, and with some empirical non-clinical data on antiviral activity against the virus. In Europe, the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use started a rolling review of remdesivir for COVID-19 on April 30th, 2 days after the National Institute of Health's clinical trial showed promising results. While the overall review time for remdesivir cannot be anticipated at this moment, it's expected that the move will allow the EMA to complete its assessment significantly earlier compared with the regular evaluation procedure, while still ensuring a robust scientific opinion is reached. On May 1st, Gilead remdesivir was approved by the FDA for emergency use in hospitalized and severe ill COVID-19 patients. And then on May 11, CHMP issued the recommendations on the compassionate use for remdesivir in all European member states. And lately, on May 26, MHRA gave the positive scientific opinion on the early access to medicine scheme for the use of remdesivir in the United Kingdom. So this brings me to my last slide. Can you please display next slide? Yeah. In summary, to enable rapid development and approval of potential treatments against COVID-19, developers should consider put together a development plan, regulatory strategy, target product profiles that could be used as the starting point for discussion with regulatory agency. The Medpace Scientific and Strategic Development Group is a global multidisciplinary team of regulatory experts with a high level of development experience that can help you define the most appropriate regulatory pathway and development strategy and assist you in navigating complex European regulatory framework to achieve a development plan that is designed to generate data that will meet regulatory requirements. Also, we could help you properly balance the available data with huge unmet medical need while making timely, rational, and scientifically sound decisions during the development process. In addition, we could assess your data and guide you on potential acceleration while maintaining patient safety and designing regulatory pathways for approval, including available special designations and accelerated mechanisms such as PRIME, conditional marketing authorizations, and other. Also, we could help you engage with regulators to discuss your regulatory strategy and pediatric drug development earlier in the course of clinical development to ensure that reliable, complete, and robust evidence of safety, efficacy, and quality for the proposed treatment will be established in support of regulatory approval. Thank you for listening, and I'm now pleased to hand over to James, who will talk about niche and expanded trials and regulatory operational issues for COVID-19 clinical studies in Europe.
Great, thank you very much, Tanya. So to move your product development into clinical trials, then there's that constant need for balance. Careful consideration of your development strategy with the ever-present need for speed. As already highlighted, one, seek interactions with regulators as early as possible to discuss the available data package, your development plan, timelines, and your general regulatory strategy. But also, two, to consider whether your trial can become part of a larger platform, whether that's an academic or an industry collaboration partner. Three, ensure that the benefits of conducting a standalone clinical trial for COVID-19 outweighs the risks and burdens to the participants and the sites. And finally, ensure that the proper representation of vulnerable and neglected populations is in place. For example, discuss the pediatric drug development early in the course of the clinical development and submit an initial PIP. So what type of clinical trial to run? In all cases, be prepared to be agile in adjusting the strategy. Next slide, please. As it leads us into discussing the regulatory aspects for clinical trials, bringing in some of the additional operational considerations. So as highlighted at the beginning, we recognize that there are multiple clinical trial types, and we'd like to look at perhaps two broad IMP categories. So starting with more the niche trial types. And by a niche trial type, in this case, I mean a more focused, specific trial, perhaps again looking at that vulnerable or neglected population, whether that's age or indication or ethnicity, or it may be a smaller or earlier phase of development. So to view this, then it's important to be reminded of what the regulatory environment in Europe for COVID-19 related clinical trials looks like. On the next slide, you'll see that the EMA have released formal guidance, current version 3 released at the end of April, and superseding previous versions, which shows that there's been continuous adaptation and adjustment. That's further supplemented with a presentation webinar on the 15th of May, available as part of the Volume 10 guidance, along with several EMA communications and press releases. But across these, priority is given to new COVID-19 related clinical trials. And it's encouraged to have clinical trials with broad country scope and European presence. We're also encouraged to utilize VHP, VHP being the voluntary harmonization procedure, where there's a coordinated regulatory authority review of core common documents, and also VHP plus, similar to VHP with the ethics committee review incorporated. But in all of these cases, accelerated assessment is foreseen. So on the next slide, essentially, those are saying that harmonization is strongly encouraged. So I'd like to share some of our observations in practice. Initially, there's been a number of single country studies, or at least studies with only one European country, we still see this. And the graphic on the screen illustrates this. So the graphic is based on studies registered in the EU Clinical Trial Register, with studies following the requested convention of COVID or COVID-19 as part of the title. And it shows that 89% of clinical trials have one European, and that's still including the UK, who continue to input into the register at least, countries currently included. 89%. Similarly striking is that only 2% of the clinical trials registered had over 10 European countries. So if we move to the next slide, then we can continue with some of our observations, perhaps. And so there's been significant variation in review or approval mechanisms for EU countries. Almost every country has or has had a special procedure. This is also true in other European non-EU countries, where in many cases there is some form of priority status. Now, our observation has been that these processes have been very rapid initially, with reviews taking place within days or even 1 to 2 weeks, which is significantly shorter than the standard review. And perhaps, I suppose, it's to be expected with a high focus. But at the same time, we've seen trials being rejected. Italy in particular had rejected a number of clinical trial applications, and priority review status in many countries has become more challenging to obtain. So as a general trend, as more applications have been submitted, so has the number of rejections increased. Ultimately, many trials are competing for the same or similar resources. So one solution to this is to consider master or model protocols. However, that's not so well suited to niche trial types that are, by their very nature, I guess, more individual. Now, we know that there's been extensive guidance on existing clinical trials with exceptional procedures to address the exceptional situation. And it's been made very clear in the EMA guidance that aspects such as home visits and direct-to-patient IMP delivery are intended to be temporary. But considering your patient's experience, particularly vulnerable populations, perhaps in these more niche trials, is important. And building in flexibility within the protocol to accommodate such things as electronic consent or verbal approvals, just as a couple of examples, will resonate in practice at sites. So these exceptional procedures and measures at European countries at a country level continue to be effective in accelerating the review of clinical trial applications, at least. Now, niche trials are not necessarily well suited to VHP, where you need 3 participating countries to be eligible. And also many countries do not adopt VHP+. So we're seeing also alliances forming between countries. So just this week, Turkey and Russia announced an agreement to cooperate in the development of a COVID-19 vaccine and plan to perform joint clinical trials. Now, these items together may influence your regulatory submission approach. So on the next slide, we'll see that with a more niche trial, the target population may be smaller, yet more sparse. And flexibility in your regulatory and startup approach is key, namely strong planning with agility. In more niche trials, you'll often have patients researching what options may be available and traveling further to participate than might otherwise be the case. So for example, Medpace have experience of patients traveling from 27 different countries to participate in clinical trials in another host country. However, with COVID-19, the situation is very different, with patients unable to travel on the basis of both health, naturally, and the restrictions that we're all aware of. Considering the evolving peaks and troughs of infection across Europe, individual countries, and even within regions or even sites within the same city, then you may need to consider a regulatory submission approach that's broader. And that can be broader in terms of increased number of countries, perhaps different regions in addition to Europe, more sites within a country with decreased referral options that might happen for these sort of more niche trials at times otherwise, and acknowledging that there are very likely going to be varying levels of contribution from sites as a result of case incidents. Broader may also mean considering umbrella or adaptive trial designs. The remap cap is being a good example of that. So these types of items and broader considerations perhaps contribute to empowerment of the operational and regulatory teams working on the projects, allowing the teams to adjust quickly compared to more of a hierarchical decision making, for example. So on the next slide, I mentioned two broad categories of trial types. And so having looked at some of the considerations for niche trials, let's look at the more expanded, potentially registrational trials, where some of the regulatory and operational considerations may differ. So on the next slide, please. For this trial type, it means that you've already got your proof of concept. And as Tanya highlighted earlier, early engagement with regulatory authorities has significance. And there may be options of continued dialogue which will continue to provide benefit. And this is particularly true in the case of Prime, for example. But let's also focus upon some of the approaches influencing the countries and sites that will be involved in the trial and some of the associated regulatory tactics. So on the next slide, we'll continue with the theme of flexibility. It continues to be important. And since countries have their own specific processes that have been and may continue to evolve, then understanding the mechanism of startup in the country is particularly significant. And in this context, we can maybe make a more wide-ranging view of what we mean by regulatory, taking regulatory to mean all approvals, whether they are governmental level, ethical, or institutional bodies, and also the documentation needed for sites to start in countries. So having associates on the ground in the countries, actively monitoring the wide-ranging regulatory requirements, not only in theory, but also in practice, can allow you to have a more confidence in your regulatory approval timelines. So it's about having the right people, not necessarily the most people locally. And this can help you make decisions around prioritization and where adjustment is needed. We've had very positive experiences with national EU regulatory authorities providing pre-review of documents for COVID-19 related trials. And in no small part due to these close relationships and connections that we have. And even with that good planning and those connections and the best epidemiological mapping, it's still challenging to predict. And you need to be prepared to be able to add on new countries. So close dialogue and interactions with sites can also yield very valuable information. And I'd like to start looking a little bit more at the sites on the next slide. So regulatory approaches are often thought of less in terms of sites, which is a mistake in my opinion, because this is a particular significance for COVID-19 clinical trials. So you're going to look to open your broader set of countries as quickly as possible. So focus upon submission-ready site lists, maximizing the number of sites up front, but accepting that it may not contain all sites in the country, at least not in all cases. And you may want to include perhaps a broad selection of sites in reserve to allow for potential future adjustment. And you may not include all of these initially or up front. So if you focus upon the national coordinator selection, then you can quite often move forward with submissions sooner. And once you've submitted and opened a country, particularly considering there is the accelerated approval processes that we're seeing in place, then you may need to quickly add further sites, or maybe even look to suspend existing sites to adjust to the location of patients. So we already highlighted the benefits that building flexibility into your protocol can bring. By continuing to consider the patient experience, then we can see that certain tests or procedures may need to shift to a combination of locations that may not all be at the main site or a hub site. So those are a few examples of some of our observations. And there are many lessons learned already and continuing to be fed back in. We found particularly that listening to the sites really should not be underestimated. So finally, perhaps earlier this week, you might have seen that the FDA Commissioner, Stephen Hahn, vowed to permanently adopt COVID-19 driven changes that make reviews and authorizations faster. He made that commitment in a speech that called on the FDA to learn from the crisis to enact lasting policies that accelerate drug development. So there has been accelerated approval of clinical trials in Europe during COVID-19. And I maybe leave with a question of how will Europe regulators continue to approach? So I'll hand back to Andrew to conclude.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, James and Tanya. This slide here just really covers the breadth of experience that Medpace has in infectious disease and applying that to COVID-19 as well. If you look at the last column there, we also have SARS-CoV-2 testing, antibody and PCR. And so just some information there, but we can move on to the next one. We do have this upcoming webinar as well, considerations for the next wave of COVID-19 development, and that will be on the 12th of June. So if you're interested in that, please, you're welcome to join that one. And with that, I'll hand over to Samaya. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. And this does bring us to the Q&A portion of this webinar. So I would like to invite audience members to continue sending questions for the webinar. And we did receive some questions already, so I'll start off with those. Our first question is, Europe appears to be past the peak of COVID-19 infection. Is there any value in initiating clinical trials, developing products in Europe as a result?
A great question. Thank you, James. Tanya, do you want to start with that one?
Thank you, James. Indeed, that is a very interesting question. From my perspective, if developers consider to apply for marketing authorization in Europe, they definitely would need to proactively engage with European regulatory agencies and health technology assessment bodies in order to discuss the overall clinical development plan, regulatory strategy, pediatric investigational plan, study designs, endpoints, study population, statistical analysis plan, timelines, and etc. This approach would enable rapid development and approval of potential treatments against COVID-19.
Thanks, and I'd maybe add to that, Tanya. Thank you. That look, the demand is there. That's for sure, and there's the continued risk of second waves or increased waves and spikes as well. So that could only increase the demand. But I think also an interesting area to continue to explore is that relapse or longer term impact approach. So for example, with the with ARDS that I know was highlighted earlier, that's maybe an under-tested area in the past because it was much more rare. Now there is a much larger population of patients who have not, the 60 or 70% of patients who didn't suffer from the mortality rate there, who are now eligible to be tested. So I think there's quite a few interesting areas.
Thank you. And our next question is, when would you recommend compassionate use programs? Can you expand upon how you would do this?
Hi, Tanya, do you want to answer that one as well, please?
Thank you, James. I can take this question. That is a great question as well. First of all, I would like to point out that enrollment in clinical trials is the primary way to generate critical data that inform the appropriate use of investigational product. At the same time, enrollment in clinical trials is, as you know, that not feasible for all patients, and therefore compassion use allows to provide emergency treatment access for a group of patients excluded from clinical protocol, for example, pregnant women, children, and etc. So in Europe, perhaps, as I mentioned during my presentation, compassion use the program is run on a national level. Therefore, what is really important to contact national competent authorities in order to discuss requirements for compassion use program and what is needed. There is no need to contact European Medicine Agency. Usually, national competent authority can ask EMA for opinion on how to administer, distribute, and use certain medicines for compassion use. However, the primary contact for compassion use would be national competent authority of each country.
Thank you very much. And another very interesting question from an audience member. And that question is, will Brexit have any impact upon the European regulatory approach, with the timing potentially overlapping with winter and seasonal risk of COVID-19?
Well, thank you. A great question. And I'll maybe field that one. Don't hear Brexit as a term so often these days with COVID. And it's a very good question. I mean, at this stage, you know, the UK are in a transitionary period until the end of the calendar year, and continue to follow the European Union guidance. I mean, the UK is incredibly closely aligned to the EU in terms of clinical trials, and so, you know, data acceptability and reciprocation is highly likely post that. From a practical perspective, you know, the UK is no longer involved in VHP and some of those mechanisms, but there is still very close collaboration and cross acceptance of information in the clinical trial setting, at least, even if outside of the political spectrum.
Great, thank you so much, James. Another question from an audience member is, has the EMA accepted legitimacy of e-consent? If yes, is a witness or special condition required?
Yeah, okay, so thank you. And I'll maybe start with that question also. So, I mean, in the case of COVID-19, the e-consent has almost become vital. Paperwork can't leave the room in certain cases. And so there have been a number of cases where e-consent has been necessary or verbal consent in place of that. So there have been definitely a softening across the different European countries. It has been more deferred to national authorities and the individual countries and member states themselves as to how they're handling that. And we have seen a definite softening across that. There was already perhaps a range of acceptance, but a greater softening in the countries who were less open to that in the past.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what is a compassionate use program in UK? Is it the early access to medicine schemes, so that's EAMS?
I can take this question. Yes, indeed, the compassion use program in UK is called early access to medicine scheme. So I just want to confirm this. Yeah, that is absolutely correct.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tanya. And that does bring us to the end of the Q&A portion for this webinar. But if we were unable to answer your questions, you can also, the team at Medpace may try to follow up with you later on as well. And if you have more lingering questions, you can also direct them to the email showing on your screens. Just let me get that up quickly. There you go. So that's info@medpace.com. So go ahead and quickly jot that down as well. And thank you everyone for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. And also just a quick reminder to audience members, you can still go ahead and download the 2 handouts for this webinar. So that's in your control panel in the handouts module. So go ahead and do that as well. And again, thank you so much to our speakers, Andrew Massey, Tanya Konovalenko, James Thomas, for that fantastic presentation. And feel free to share the recorded version of this webinar when it becomes available. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day and weekend, everyone. Take care of yourselves.